In 1965, while filming The Sound of Music, something funny happened that made the whole cast laugh so much they couldn't finish a very important scene. It wasn't anything tragic. No one got hurt or passed away. It was just a silly noise. The noise was so ridiculous and childish that it ruined take after take inside the gazebo, where one of the most emotional scenes was being shot. The studio spent thousands of dollars trying to fix the issue, but they couldn't. So instead, they kept quiet about it and never spoke of it publicly. For nearly 30 years, no one was allowed to say what really happened. Even actor Christopher Plummer, who didn't like the film much, kept the secret. Finally, Julie Andrews revealed the story years later during a live TV interview. Long before the Hollywood version, in 1956, a German producer had already made 2 movies based on Maria von Trapp's life story. These films became very popular in Germany and many other countries in Europe and South America. But American studios didn't take them seriously and thought they were low quality. Then something surprising happened. Paramount sent a Tony Award-winning director, Vincent J. Donahue, to look for new movie ideas. He also found the films clumsy, but something about the story moved him deeply. He didn't want to make a movie. Instead, he said it should be a Broadway musical starring Mary Martin. That idea changed everything. Years earlier, Maria von Trapp had sold the rights to her story for just $9,000. Today, that would be about $104,000. Not a huge amount. Hollywood had tried to buy just the title, but Maria refused. She said if anyone was going to tell her story, they had to tell the whole thing. In the late 1950s, Mary Martin and her husband Richard Halliday were trying to reach Maria about turning her story into a stage show. But Maria was on a religious mission trip in Papua New Guinea with Father Wasner. Each time they arrived at a new place, they found letters from the couple, but Maria wasn't interested. She ripped them up. She wanted to help people, not be part of Broadway. But fate stepped in. When Maria and Father Wasner returned to the U.S. by ship, they arrived in San Francisco. Richard Halliday was waiting at the dock. He gave them tickets to see Mary Martin perform in Annie, Get Your Gun. Maria was impressed by the show, but she told them she had already sold the rights to the Germans. Still, she told them they were welcome to try. Originally, the idea was to use traditional Austrian songs in the musical and just add a few new ones. But Richard Rodgers and Oscar Hammerstein didn't like that. They said mixing their Broadway style with old folk songs wouldn't work. They gave the producers a choice. Let us write all the music or we're out. The producers agreed to wait until they finished Flower Drum Song. That decision paid off. The musical opened on Broadway on November 16, 1959, with Mary Martin and Theodore Bikel in the lead roles. It cost $400,000 to produce, but advance ticket sales were amazing, worth about $232 million in today's money. The musical ran for 1,443 performances, and Mary Martin missed only one show the entire time. Soon after, in June 1960, a bidding war began for the film rights. 20th Century Fox won by offering $1.25 million, which would be over $13 million today. The studio was in trouble financially after the failure of Cleopatra, so this was a big gamble. The deal included a strange condition. If the movie earned more than $12.5 million, the writers would get 10% of the profits. One of the writers, Howard Lindsay, thought that was a joke. At the time, no movie had ever made that much. Casting the role of Maria for the movie brought more drama. Julie Andrews was very sad after being passed over for the role of Eliza in My Fair Lady. The studio had chosen Audrey Hepburn instead, saying Andrews wasn't glamorous enough for film. But Sound of Music director Robert Wise watched unfinished footage of Mary Poppins and was impressed. He told the screenwriter they had to hire her before someone else did. Julie signed on for $225,000, or about $2.28 million today. She didn't get any share of the profits. Meanwhile, Mary Martin made over $8 million from the stage version. Fox would later regret not giving Andrews a cut of the film's success. When Andrews won an Oscar for Mary Poppins, she thanked the man who rejected her, Jack Warner. Casting Captain Von Trapp wasn't easy either. Christopher Plummer didn't want the role. He thought the character was boring. He even wrote to the screenwriter asking for better dialogue, more emotion, and a personal song to show how he felt about Maria. The director tried other big stars like Sean Connery, Richard Burton, and Bing Crosby, but none of them worked out. Finally, Wise flew to London and convinced Plummer to take the role by promising he could help shape the character. Even after agreeing, Plummer didn't enjoy the movie. He called it The Sound of Mucus, and admitted to drinking during filming. He was even drunk during the final family performance scene. In the end, Julie Andrews' salary turned out to be one of Hollywood's biggest mistakes. She helped make the movie a classic, but she didn't earn anything more beyond her flat fee. Still, her legacy, and the legacy of The Sound of Music, remains unforgettable. The film went on to make over $286 million around the world, but Julie Andrews didn't earn a single penny beyond her original paycheck. Fox had been in serious trouble before that. Their previous film, Cleopatra, cost $15 million and nearly destroyed the studio. They had to sell off their backlit and real estate just to survive, and even the studio's chairman was fired. But The Sound of Music turned things around and saved the studio. Ironically, the person who helped carry the film to success, Julie Andrews, was the one they underpaid the most. Not everyone who auditioned got the chance to be in the film. A young Mia Farrow tried out 3 times for the role of Liesel. She was 20 years old, but the director's notes said she seemed gentle and soft, but didn't have enough energy, and they didn't think she could dance well enough. Interestingly, Shamian Carr, who did win the part, was actually older, 21, but had the spark the director was looking for. Losing that role ended Mia Farrow's chances at musicals, but it eventually led her to star in Rosemary's Baby, which launched a career in a different direction. Several other future stars auditioned too, including Kurt Russell, Patty Duke, and Terry Garr. But it was 15-year-old Nicholas Hammond who got the role of Friedrich. Years later, he would become the first live-action Spider-Man in a 1977 TV series. The rest of the children were picked through long, careful auditions, and they built real friendships that lasted for decades. Even long after the film, the Vaughn Trapp kids stayed in touch and reunited often. Julie Andrews and Christopher Plummer remained connected with them for life. For 27 years, no movie could touch the box office record of Gone with the Wind. It stayed number 1 through wars, through the golden age of Hollywood, and even through the rise of television. But then The Sound of Music came along. Just 18 months after its release, in November 1966, it did the impossible. It broke the record. With $286 million in earnings, it became the highest-grossing movie of all time. And that number wasn't adjusted for modern prices. It was based on actual ticket sales of the era, which made the accomplishment even more amazing. People weren't just paying more, they were showing up in huge numbers. Musicals had never had this kind of power. And the success wasn't just financial. The film sold 283 million tickets globally. That means almost 1 out of every 12 people alive at the time saw it. Even in countries where people didn't speak English, audiences connected with the music and the story. From Europe to Asia to Africa, people sang the same songs and felt the same emotions. There were no social media campaigns, no YouTube trailers, and no streaming services. It all happened through word of mouth and people going back to see it again and again. It wasn't just a movie, it became a worldwide event. It united people. The songs became part of life everywhere, even when the lyrics weren't understood. It was like everyone was sharing the same heartbeat. Then came the Oscars. The film won 5 major awards: Best Picture, Best Director, Best Sound, Best Film Editing, and Best Original Score. That year had many serious dramas like Dr. Zhivago, but it was the uplifting musical that took center stage. Director Robert Wise had already won an Oscar for West Side Story, and with this film, he showed he was truly a master of the musical genre. These Oscars weren't just for the story, they were for the way the movie was made. Every part worked together perfectly. The sound, the timing, the music, the editing. And even in a time when musicals were often seen as light entertainment, The Sound of Music convinced critics and audiences that it was real art. But behind all the magic, there was one moment that almost ruined everything. One of the most romantic scenes in the movie is when Maria and Captain Von Trapp finally admit their love and kiss in the gazebo. On screen, it looks beautiful. Soft lighting, gentle words, and a perfect moment. But what people didn't know was that the set was full of chaos. Strange, loud, wet-sounding noises were ruining take after take. These sounds were caused by the carbon arc lights used to create the moonlight effect. These massive lights were powerful but made strange hissing and popping noises. It was so bad that the actors couldn't hear each other, and the romantic mood kept getting interrupted. It took a lot of effort to fix in post-production, and the truth was kept secret for years. But that's part of what made the film so special. Despite all the problems behind the scenes, what audiences saw was pure magic. The dreamy glow of the gazebo scene, the soft lighting, the tender kiss, the emotional climax, was almost ruined by something utterly ridiculous. The lights themselves. The massive carbon arc lights that were meant to mimic moonlight didn't just shine, they groaned. Loudly. They let out a noise that sounded like a long, wet raspberry. Not once. Not twice. But again and again. Every time Julie Andrews and Christopher Plummer leaned in for their romantic moment, the lights let out another awkward, flatulent burst. It turned into a farce. Plummer would whisper, "Maria, I love you," and then, "Pete HBBBBBT. Take ruined." They tried 20 times. 20 failed takes. Andrews later described the absurdity of standing nose to nose with Plummer, trying to deliver one of the most emotional scenes in the movie, while bursting into laughter like school kids every time the lights made another rude sound. The more serious they tried to be, the funnier it got. The crew stood by, helpless, as the hours ticked away and the two leads broke down in fits of uncontrollable giggles. Eventually, director Robert Wise scrapped the whole setup. He changed the lighting plan entirely. Instead of using the arc lights, he decided to shoot in silhouette. He positioned the actors in front of the gazebo's softly glowing windows, hiding their faces, and their laughter, in shadow. It turned out to be a stroke of brilliance. The scene took on a soft, mysterious mood that made it even more romantic. What had started as a technical nightmare became one of the most beloved romantic scenes in cinema history. But the studio didn't want anyone to know. 20th Century Fox locked it down. No talk of raspberries. No giggling. No ruined takes. The film had to seem perfect. Interviews were carefully managed. Behind-the-scenes chaos was kept secret for decades, until Julie Andrews finally started telling the story on talk shows. "It's very hard," she said, "to be nose-to-nose doing a love scene and having these awful raspberries coming at you." Meanwhile, Christopher Plummer was privately fuming. He hated the film, calling it gooey, and famously nicknaming it the sound of mucus. He thought it was beneath him. The lighting issues, the delays, the sentimental tone, none of it helped. Though he stayed professional and delivered his lines, inside he was seething. To make things worse, he'd gained weight during filming from overindulging in food and alcohol. He later admitted he was drunk in several scenes, including the famous music festival moment where Captain Von Trapp sings Edelweiss with tears in his eyes. Viewers saw emotion. What they didn't see was that Plummer could barely stand up straight. Years later, he admitted it was one of the hardest roles he ever played, not because of emotional complexity or physical demands, but because he had to pretend to care. He called Salzburg his prison of sentimentality. And yet, somehow, his cynicism didn't show. Even when tipsy, even when frustrated, he gave a performance that millions came to love. In time, Plummer softened. He began to appreciate the film's impact. "It seduced me in the end," he said in interviews decades later. He grew to feel an odd pride about it, resentment mixed with a kind of reverence for something that had become bigger than any of them. And then there was the voice. Most fans don't realize that when Captain Von Trapp sings, they're not always hearing Christopher Plummer. For the longer, more difficult vocal parts, the voice was actually that of Bill Lee, a professional vocalist who also sang in Disney films. Plummer's own vocal recordings were partially used, but the studio decided Lee's voice had more polish. Plummer was frustrated by this, feeling it diminished his contribution. But the dubbing was seamless. Even today, most viewers believe it's him singing Edelweiss from start to finish. It wasn't just the adults who endured challenges. 5-year-old Kim Carruth, who played Little Gretel, nearly drowned during the rowboat scene. Just before filming, Julie Andrews was told Carruth couldn't swim. The plan was for Andrews to grab her the moment the boat flipped.